Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kathy Blanchard. I'm the Global President of Allison & Partners All Told offering, which is our integrated marketing services. As marketing and communications professionals, we've all been stretched and challenged in so many ways during 2020. I think the word pivot has become just as much overused as the word unprecedented. One of the key challenges that we've been helping clients navigate over the past several months is really rethinking their event marketing efforts. Prior to COVID, a third of marketers were spending more than 20% of the overall budgets on event marketing. Today, we're going to be sharing our perspectives on how to reimagine CES, but this perspective can be applied to any of your ongoing trade shows and event efforts. Let me start by introducing some of my esteemed colleagues, starting with Jordan Fischler. Jordan, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us this morning. I oversee our consumer technology practice here at Allison & Partners. I've been to more CESs than I can count. At some point around 10, I stopped counting entirely, but have done the show numerous times and has seen it evolve over the years. And obviously this year we will have a totally new experience given everything that is happening.
Hi, everybody. My name is Todd Summers. I work on our integrated marketing team at Allison & Partners. And I did a lot of work in-house at brands, helping them with various events. So helping thought leaders craft their content, both from the written and video elements, but also the slide crafting as well to make the most of events. And so really looking forward to this conversation today, and I'll hand it over to Owen.
And I'm Owen Clark. I oversee our storytelling studio at Allison & Partners. That's our in-house content team. So pre-COVID, that was a lot of times spent on the road, preparing for events, filming pre-recorded packages, social assets, that sort of thing. And since COVID hit, we've been sort of leading the pivot to creating digital and virtual events. We've done probably a dozen or so in the last couple months here, everything from traditional press events to sort of integrated conferences to webinars and some of the other functions we'll talk about today. My original background was in live television. I was a TV reporter. So the idea of sort of doing live video is something I did before. And so I'm also passionate about helping people who are participating, executives who are presenting, make sure they come across the best in that format. It's something we'll talk a little bit more.
All right. Thanks, Owen. So as we begin the presentation, I just ask everybody to please use the chat function if you have specific questions. We have a bit of a formal presentation, but lots of time at the end for questions and answers. And we'll certainly pose anything that you submit to the panelists here. So CES is going virtually. I'm sure so many of you on the call have participated in CES, maybe not as many times as Jordan has. That might be the record for one of the professionals that I know, but this is the first time a historic event like this is happening where they're going in a purely virtual format. And so that raises a lot of implications for marketers. What does this mean in terms of how you showcase your technology in an environment where you can't see it and touch it, where those tactile elements are no longer? How do you get the media attention that you were expecting to generate awareness? Or how do you think about, entertaining or getting in front of top prospects or clients in an environment where you can't physically be in the same room anymore? The fact of the matter is, if you are thinking about CES in the same format as you have in the past, if you're not rethinking and proactively shaping your marketing and communications efforts to this new environment, you're going to be disappointed. And so the premise today is really about the questions you should be posing as you think through your CES strategy, whether that's from the earn side, from the production, how you interact with clients and customers and prospects. So really at the heart of this, it's about reimagining what your presence at CES might look like, not replacing it. And it really starts with asking the questions, what was it that you were using CES to really accomplish? Was it you were trying to launch a new product or service? Were you looking for a platform for thought leadership for your executive team? Were you counting on media in order to drive awareness? So as we go through these elements, we're going to pose questions at the beginning of each section to really think about how to lead you on a path as you reimagine your strategy for CES. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Owen to kick us off.
And I think Jordan's going to give us even a higher level take.
I'm going to hand off to Jordan.
The CES veteran.
Hi, everybody. And as Kathy was just mentioning, it really is, what is your objective for the show? Why are you at CES this year, or any event that you may be going to? It may be for the same reason you've been there in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be doing the same activities in the same way. So what's your goal for being there? What are you attempting to accomplish? And ultimately, what does this specific event do for you as you start your year? And we want to start and level set with those questions, because that will ultimately help to frame all of the tactics that you bring into the show, and also when you implement those tactics. Because just because the show starts mid-January doesn't mean that your activities start then. Many of them start right now, frankly. So we want to make sure that everybody's thinking about the show for the next few months and really doing what they can to set themselves up for success once the show launches.
And so to continue with that sort of question vein, once you've identified those goals, what we've been starting with all our clients when it comes to these digital events, and really content in general, is starting by our audience, right? What do we want them to experience? And more specifically, what do we want them to do after they, achieve that experience? And this really drove home for, I think, me and Todd when we produced the digital event, and our attendees were 100 children and their parents. This is for a biotech company. So we really had to think, there's no way these kids are going to sit through an hour of talking head videos. But I think we learned a lot from that process and thinking of the programming there. And I'm not going to say journalists are children, but they're not children in the sense that they are often impatient. They want to do things their own way. They're looking for information quickly and to be, they get a lot of stuff thrown at them. They want to be entertained. So I think, again, it's valid to think, what do we want from, whether it's journalists or analysts or customers, prospects, what is that going to look like? And then what's the suite of assets we have available to bring that to life? I think if you look, there's so much focus on live and the potential to do live, and that's important. But I think we've seen the really good events. And if you go to everything from the big ticket RNC, DNC conferences to some of the stuff we've seen Apple produce recently, it's all of the moment, it's happening, but a lot of it was pre-recorded, right? So we have live, true live, look live, so sticking that into the middle of a program, truly pre-taped packages that everyone's aware of, and then things that are just also on demand. Again, thinking about maybe reporters want to access that video later, and that's a great asset they might not have been able to have before when they only had that presentation on stage. So how do you expand that? We really want people to think about time, right? If you have a half an hour blocked off, let's run, think about run a show. How are we using that time to the best? It's not just half an hour of talking. Let's think about it's 10 minutes for this presentation. It's a 5-minute product video. It's this much Q&A. So really blocking that out. And then we've really had people focus on having true technical direction, having somebody, even if you're using something like Zoom as a platform, there's ways to plus that up. You really benefit from having a couple of true technical directors that are focused on the digital experience, so the rest of the presenters and everyone else can focus on what they're doing, which is presenting the information. Jordan will hit on this a little more, but this idea of integrating PR and content, right? Like, we need to make sure that the content we're creating and how we're presenting it is achieving and mapping back to those goals. It's really easy to get so focused on just the bells and the whistles that are available in these digital events and not think about, do we even need to be doing that? Is that furthering the goal we want? And how is it going to fit into that broader PR structure that we're coming up with? And that includes things like, when do you want to release it? Do you want to preview people with this content? Do we want to make sure it's available to certain people after to embed into their stories? How are we going to create the maximum amount of impact? Because I think we all know, to the point of it's not being the same as traditional CES, it's not going to get the same level of eyeballs and not going to have this sort of same process that everyone was used to implementing over these decades. So there's going to be a fight for attention. And you have to be strategic, and the people who sort of go above and beyond the basics, I think, are really going to stand out when it comes to the show.
Well, and to Owen's point on some of that content, what can you make snackable and really leverage on your social channels? But also at the show, there is a decent mix of brands that have things that are kind of behind lock and key, whether their press conferences invite only or their booth is closed or portions of their booth are closed and things are really only behind closed doors. And this is an opportunity to really think differently about that. What really does need to be removed from public view, but what can you actually open up so consumers can come and see it firsthand that wouldn't normally even be on the show floor or be in Vegas that week?
Exactly. Again, so we want this, and we're seeing this talked about a lot, but how do we improve this experience? How do we make this better at times? Again, CES is a magical place, right? But not everything is perfect. There are things that drive people crazy about it. How can we eliminate some of those pain points and make it better? So again, you identified maybe your program mix. Now, how do you bring it to life? And a lot of that has started with, again, the tech that is available to us, especially as we're in places where it's a true lockdown or quarantine environment. We're continuing to see a lot of content captured from home. I mean, everything you see on your news channels and stuff, a lot of those interviews are being done remotely. That's becoming sort of the standard. So that's absolutely something available to us and we'll probably utilize. But really want to start by making sure that looks and sounds as great as is possible. So we'll start with sort of assessing what's available, often with the spokesperson in their house. Shipping basic kits is a great option. It doesn't involve a lot of setup. We can walk step by step. I guarantee you, we've walked the least tech savvy people you can imagine through every step of this process. We will get there. Making sure everything, like, again, audio and internet are probably the biggest determinants of success, right? Because if they're all choppy and you can't hear the person, it doesn't matter how great you look. So you really have to think of all those pieces together. Doing dedicated tech tests before really doing a true rehearsal. Again, like if you were doing this on stage, you would devote time to do a true rehearsal. You should give that same level of attention to what you're doing and then make sure everyone's set up. And then we are seeing folks move outside of the home environment, right? Again, do socially distanced shoots. There are specific COVID protocols in every state and standards now for broadcast. You can set up socially distanced shoots. So you can use a studio or a place of your office if you bring a local crew in to set that up. So there is the ability to kind of level up a little bit higher in a really safe and professional way. So again, looking at that full suite of options for the tech, and we can help you guys sort of figure out what the best option is for the use case and for the executive to make sure they look, sound, and come across really good. And so in that same vein, so you look great, your tech's all set up, things are good. If you don't know how to say the right stuff, again, that's all for naught. I've been doing media training for more than 10 years here at Allison Partners, coming from TV. It's never been more important. We used to say that, like, doing the remote satellite interview, Major League Curveball, hardest thing you can do. Now, basically every video interview is a remote satellite. And it's actually harder because you're not in a professional studio, you're at home with distractions, and you have to emote to a webcam, which is really different than emoting to a big giant camera with a blinking red light. I mean, even little things like eyeline, like how many interviews have we seen where the person is talking like this at the little box in the corner instead of at the audience, and that impact is so different. And we're seeing the line of questioning. Again, you can be hit with questions about COVID, about social justice issues that you've never been hit with before. And it may just be as simple as giving your executives the tools to feel comfortable bridging back away from them. But I think the content is more nuanced and important, and making sure that any spokesperson feels comfortable in that environment and comfortable tackling whatever questions come across is hugely important. This is something we do virtually now. It's a couple hours with executives, but it really gets them prepared in a way that even if they were media trained and great doing big live studio in-person interviews, they really needed to be trained how to deal in this new virtual environment.
So coming back to those questions, how do you bring your product to life if you're introducing something new, whether it's a new iteration or an entirely new product that's never been seen before, but you can't actually bring people into your booth where they can pick it up and feel and touch and experience it live? How do you recreate those experiences virtually? How you talk about your product, the assets you have built around it, all of those things become even more critical in this kind of virtual world.
So again, just to build on that, it's sort of related to what you're saying, but words matter more than ever. Stories matter more than ever. You can't rely on the personal relationship you have with that person in the booth that you're able to sort of build. And again, frankly, there's just more noise in this virtual environment. So just being the leading technology solutions provider, releasing your 2.0 is not, you need more than that. You need to help craft the narrative. You need to make sure everything from the copy that you're producing on your website to the narrative you're developing for your executives who are giving and your product folks who are demonstrating is really crisp, is really clear, and it's obvious, because journalists are not going to have time to unpack that and fight through it. You're just going to lose out. So we worked with folks for everything from speech writing, copy development, to the script that goes into your pre-recorded videos. But again, really thinking about the story, the tone. Are you going to be approachable? Are you going to acknowledge this as a weird circumstance? Like, you really have to think that through. It's not enough to just sort of write the staid traditional product speech and expect people to sit through that for 45 minutes on a webinar. They're just not going to do that. They're fatigued from this video experience. You have to find a way, make that tighter, make it crisper, and make that story really clear and stronger. And then, so the actual demo itself, again, you can't move and touch and feel the device. Obviously, there's options for doing mailers in advance. That's part of your strategy, but you're going to assume the majority of the folks aren't going to be able to do that. And we've heard from journalists directly that they find this a real struggle. They like to make their own opinions. They know the product person is going to tell them a certain thing, but they want to be able to add their own opinion. So again, yes, they can't touch and hold, but they can see the product in 100 and 360 degrees through digital animation, right? 360 graphics have really let us showcase the full breadth of a product and actually do things you can't see, right? Example there, exploding the feature out, moving inside, seeing things like wavelengths and features come to life through digital animation that you can't see with your naked eye. So again, really thinking about a great product video that illustrates the points that you're not going to be able to physically show to people is, again, more than table stakes now, but really has to be something that you're putting time and energy into. And it's not as maybe crazy as folks think. Like, the stuff we've done, we've built off all existing assets and product specs and built to the 3D environment. So it's not like you're going to need necessarily to get out there and shoot a whole new commercial. Again, that's an option, but it can be done relatively simply. But if you just need to remember that because you can't rely on the physical, how do you make sure the content helps to get across the products and features that you really want to make sure come across? And again, the good news is once you've invested in that, it becomes this useful piece of content, right? It can live on websites, it can live in newsrooms, which we'll talk a little bit more. It can go out as a social asset later when you want to reach, directly to consumers. So it's an investment that, unlike training someone to do a one-on-one demo and it's over, now this asset lives on. It can be a tool for your sales teams for your earned outreach. So we think it's worth the time because it will pay off down the road. And again, the final point is how do you release it? Again, thinking about a premiere is this I'm using. It's like a new Netflix show that drops, a new movie. Like, when this is not live, but it's no one's seen it until a certain time. So you can still build that sense of anticipation, that sense of reveal with pre-recorded, great-looking assets.
But one point I also want to stress too, as you think through the planning of your content, Owen talked about the premiere element. I think you really need to put yourself in your audience's perspective and think about those on-demand moments to generate content. You need to create assets for them. And I think if you're doing it right, you're creating more content than you ever have before. Because what you might need for an analyst is different than a member of the media, or an influencer. You want to create content for some that they can consume. For others, you want to create content that they can edit because they aren't on the show floor to capture their own original content. But we know journalists need that. We know influencers need that. So you can think of your premiere as sort of the center of your content, but think about all the different slices that you need. And it's not simply as one demo video that works for all audiences. I think another thing we've seen too is a very common reaction of brands is, oh yeah, that answer you're looking for is, no, that's in this like long 15-page white paper. Let me send you that. And I'm sure, journalists, you have time to read that along with all my competitors' information and write a balanced article, right? Like, make life easy for your audience, design content specifically for them so they can do your job for you, right? Make it fun, consumable, shareable, the kind of assets that they need to be successful. And don't forget about your stakeholders and employees too, right? They aren't going to be experiencing these events in the same way they have. So make sure you're communicating with them. Again, often your employees and stakeholders are some of your biggest cheerleaders to help you get the word out as well. So don't overlook them focusing just on external audiences. On the next slide, we really want to walk you through ways to think about replacing the impact that the event had in many ways. So I'd say the ratings for the Emmys were down, the NBA finals are down, and the couple dozen digital events we've participated in have been down. No matter what efforts the CES show creators make, it's going to be different this year because there aren't going to be 150,000 plus people in Vegas. The energy, the enthusiasm, the excitement, it will be different. And that's not a fault of them, but for the impact you're responsible for your organization, you have to think about how you can replace that. And so there's some simple tactics that you can plan for, and it can certainly get more complicated. But Jordan sort of alluded to, you could go direct to consumers with a lot of this coverage. Like, you could take owned content you create and reach directly to people. You still need to help, supply the media with content as well. You can use channels like Outbrain and Taboola to amplify the earned coverage you get. You can whitelist your influencer content to make sure you're promoting that. So whether it's lead generation activities that, your sales team is going to face a different headwind this year than they have before, you can be an ally to them to help them create demand and leads. The virtual events do offer better tracking than the badge scanning techniques we've seen in a lot of virtual or physical events before. So the tech is there, but you really need to plan for this in advance to figure out what other amplification networks you need to tap into whether that's digital, social, trade, industry, publications, all these things you want to be really smart about so you can pick the timing that amplifies that premier moment that Owen talked about. Once you launch, you want to get to market and make sure, despite the attendance, you're delivering the same impact for your organization. So shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, is just thought leadership generally. So, you know, the 24-hour news cycle in 2020 has been replaced with the, 10 or 15-minute news cycle, right? Everything's moving pretty quickly. There's no shortage of issues to react to jump in the conversation on, and they go by very quickly. So you have a few months before CES, right? You have time to plan. But if the thought leaders at your organization don't know what they're going to say about those issues, if they haven't really anchored a thought leadership strategy into your company's mission, vision, values, your customers, your employees, your stakeholders are all going to wonder why. So I think we've seen through COVID in particular, some great leaders really emerge, speaking to issues that are important to them. Again, they don't need to be controversial issues, but these are things that people are going to ask you about that you need to understand why your business exists, what your mission is, and not just speak about your product and features. And so I think, the great news here is there's plenty of time to plan, but we need to think through some of the different ways that you can prepare people to have the same kind of impact with thought leadership. And there's a lot of great tools you can use to set up these conversations. But the last thing you want to do is go into CES trying to make it up off the cuff. That's like, it's not good. As Owen said, it's always a challenge to present digitally, and you just don't know how it will be consumed. So think of that on-demand environment and your audience and how that will impact.
And this again, so you've got the platform that Todd mentioned, and sort of it's so important, but then how do you actually get it across? And this is an area that actually, again, really passionate about. I mean, the work we do in the normal times, pre-COVID, with presenters and preparing them is so often just getting them to stop standing at a podium reading their slides. Like everyone's sort of like, oh, we're gonna miss all the live presentations. How often is the live presentation experience just not very good? It's you're sitting 200 feet away, the person's standing on a podium reading a PowerPoint deck. Like when you see more and more of these presentations, half the people are on their phone in the audience anyway, right? So it's not like this is a loss. We really have a chance now to reimagine that. And a really simple way is just to change the perspective. Don't shoot the person. You no longer have to be far away. We can be up and close with this person, talking directly to the audience, into the camera, instead of watching them from the side, from far away. We can incorporate visuals in really interesting and different ways. We don't have to just rely on bullets and slides. We can bring digital features in and around them and use just a basic seamless background. So there's so many opportunities to really reimagine what was frankly not that great an experience. I mean, there are great, super compelling live speakers, right? But a lot of the executives I know that we work with, that's not their day-to-day job. That's not something that they excel at necessarily. And we have definitely found reading a teleprompter in this environment does not work well. You're too close to it. You can see your eyes move. And just because everyone's on these presentations all day long with people talking, when all of a sudden someone gets to reading, it's jarring. So we really can't rely on the sort of traditional, we write the executive the speech, maybe they look at it a little bit and they read it off the teleprompter. Like that's not gonna be the process. But the good news is in these videos, we can edit these. They just have to knock out 10-second chunks, right? So really there's an opportunity to set up some of our spokespeople and our presenters up for success in ways where they may have been a little limited by the true in-person format. So we want people to rethink this. Again, it can be part of a program where there's one super wow pre-recorded piece, and then a traditional Q&A where you're just talking through with folks. Yeah, that's this blend of both the immediate and the sort of higher end. But I think it's a great opportunity to actually get folks to rethink. It was not a great format before. And similar, right? So there's the keynotes, the big presentations, the fireside chats, and the panel discussions. And we've done a lot of panel discussions. I think it's actually been, sort of virtually. It's a format that I think people are open to. We want to see connections. We want to see people talking. It allows for thought leadership. Sort of the virtual video conference is natural for conversations. We're doing them all day long. So moving to that hasn't been difficult. But it's important to, again, take that beyond just the Zoom. And there's really simple ways you can do that. Adding in basic graphics at the front, adding a branded border, inserting sort of different graphic elements or cutting away to visuals. Makes it feel more like you're watching a TV broadcast, like you're watching a news show with interviews from people and less like just a traditional Zoom. So, and there's ways to really plus that up. to make it tighter. We've been doing a lot of these as pre-recorded lives to make sure it gets down a little bit, so you can really allow for a free-flowing conversation with the understanding that we are going to tighten this up. And we've seen panelists, I think, really kind of emerge from their shell, knowing they get to just have this conversation. They're not sort of self-editing all the time in that environment. Again, there's going to be opportunities that are live that exist like that, but think about how we can expand this format. Take questions from the audience like we'll be doing today, but have a moderator in a chat so you can still allow for that engagement, but it's not the same experience of someone, raising their hand in a crowd and asking this question for everyone, which we know can always result in sort of awkward interactions. So allow for engagement, but again, think of how we can plus this format up. I think it's really available as a great tool to really utilize for something like CES, where people are looking for well-rounded discussions.
All right, the nitty gritty. A lot of brands show up to CES because it's their opportunity to meet with the media, meet with their analysts, meet with their key stakeholders, develop some influencer content, go to some cool parties. There's lots of different reasons why you may be there and have kind of both business and social opportunities to interact with this kind of media influencer analyst stakeholder pool. And there's really a couple different ways that you need to start to be thinking about it. Are you a medium-sized or large brand who is going to be, who the press are going to be looking for in advance of the show or at the show, because they want to know what you're doing, and in which case, there's a different strategy you can take, versus are you more of a startup, or are you a brand entering an area or a category that you've never been in before, and you need to figure out how to get to those right reporters. I've said this for years, whether it's virtual or live, get to people early. There's just no reason for the first time you're having a conversation about your product to be happening at the show on media day or at the show on show floor day. Make sure you've gotten to the right people as early as possible and given them your story under embargo or under NDA, however you need to frame that. So that way they're ready to go. You're helping the reporters out. They know that those first few days of the show, whether it's physical or virtual, are going to be crazy. Media day is going to be a very long day this year. The show floor and booth experience is going to be entirely different than it's ever been before. People are going to need to be figuring out how to navigate that. You're in a better position if your story is preceded. It also helps you out with a whole slew of award opportunities that happen at the show, whether they're pre-submitted awards or awards that are usually given out on the show floor. So it's really something to think about. Those pre-briefs become even more critical in a virtual environment, whether you're a brand that people are expecting, because then they just appreciate the fact that they've gotten your information early, or you're a brand that they're not expecting, and then you've got to do that work of getting to them virtually in advance. And then you kind of think through, what is your kind of cadence of news at the show? What are you pre-briefing on? When is that getting launched? Did you submit things for CTA awards, which were due on Friday? And in which case, what is the CTA cadence for when those things are getting announced if you win? To take that into effect, you obviously don't want the CTA to kind of trump your own news moment. So make sure that everything is aligned there. Do you need a press conference? Is it the formal media day press conference, or are you talking about some sort of presentation moment within your virtual booth experience? What other show news do you have kind of rolling out, and how are you doing those product demos? To Owen's point, we talked a lot about the virtual product experience, but also are you getting even a small pool of those products that you can have access to in advance of the show, and can you pull that into your pre-briefing experience? Even if it's as small as 5. Those 5 products, who are the right 5 people that are going to have the most impact if you get that product in their hands before the show, and tell them that there's only 5 of them out there in the world right now, and that they're exclusively in the set that's going to get one of them. Let's leverage every asset that you have, especially if you're a smaller brand with something cool, new, and different that's coming to market. This is an opportunity for you if you've got a couple versions of it that will be accessible before you need them in that kind of virtual booth experience at the show.
And again, so much of what we've talked about, the different assets you can create, you need that hub for it, right? And the newsroom, and I say sort of newsroom because so often it's an afterthought for brands, right? It's the repository for things that had other use cases. A press release you put up, it's sort of like, it's like documenting history, and oftentimes. And again, that serves a function, but for CES, it really is going to serve a practical need. And you're just thinking about the reporter experience. They had a way of doing the physical event. That's now different. They're not going to have it. They're going to need to be able to easily find the information maybe you provide in a Q&A or a webinar. You can't make them go around searching for it. So having that all in one place, easily accessible, and then interesting, to Todd's point, the 15-page white paper you wrote for is totally something else. Sticking it in there and expecting it to function almost like a high-level Q&A, it just isn't going to work. So that time, turn that into something interactive. Turn that into B-roll and assets that folks can download in the media. We know they are trying to drive attention to their websites as well. Rich media content they can embed produces better metrics for them. So when I think about using the newsroom concept to really live what the name says, make it interesting, make it multimedia, make it something that reporters going to find incredibly useful and hopefully bookmark to come back to. Again, it's going to establish this as something that they realize is a useful resource, and not sort of like when they lost the 2 other emails with a press release that they might go back to it. Like, think about how we can really make this a hub that provides information for everybody who might need it.
And again, what of these assets can you make available early, either as part of your pre-brief or maybe as an embargo, as a piece of content that you embargo early and send out? Again, do everything you can to kind of seed that story as early as possible.
And shifting gears again, we can't lose sight of how challenging 2020 was for all of us, including your clients and customers. And thinking back to a hospitality suite or a client dinner or drinks in an airport bar, I think, those of us business travel is we're all used to it. And I think, quite frankly, a lot of us miss it, right? From time to time, you wouldn't mind some of those events in your life. And I think you have to put yourself in your customers' shoes too. They're going to miss it too. The real human interaction piece has been lagging. And if your customers stuck with you through this year, I hope you're going to remind them how important they are to you, right? You need to show them that way in a way that's appropriate for your brand. Big parties aren't for every brand, but think about what's right with your mission, vision, and values within your organization and create experiences that reward that. So the approach that we're thinking about in particular is, again, putting yourself in the customer's shoes. What do they need to see so that you can properly show them appreciation? Or if CES was an opportunity for you to network and meet new people, how do you funnel those prospects in to show them, again, who you are as a brand, what it's like to work with you as individuals? All that stuff needs to be communicated in a way that will be totally lost in these virtual environments. We've seen it demo after demo, the hallway networking or the subtle sort of things that happen when people introduce you to. That stuff is lacking, and you're going to have to create some of that. But again, make it human, make it personal, make it something that is really going to surprise and delight people, and it really will help your brand stand out. So think about it from your customer's perspective, from your prospect's perspective. One good example that's come up in some other client work is, and again, you probably don't want clients and prospects to mingle. You might, but maybe you don't want to create an experience where those longtime customers or maybe a problematic customer is interacting with prospects in a way that could be awkward. Maybe you need to create separate tracks for those, but plan for these events, and we'll talk through some of our different approaches. But one of us is really around creating a small group experience. Again, even in an environment like this, we're so happy to have all of you. We know it doesn't feel as intimate as we were standing in the booth at the trade show floor, where we could pick up a physical product, share and interact with it. I can introduce you to the right people that you need to know in the moment. Some of that is lost in virtual, but small groups help make an experience more intimate, allow people to get their questions answered. We've seen that with a lot of events. Sometimes, there's a queue of questions and you might not have time to get your question answered, but you want to make sure you're processing those. You can get people to interact with you. And think about even, we've seen a lot of events that are like, we were a 4-day event, we're going to still be a 4-day event. Okay, well, I think for the panelists here, we're just hoping a kid or a dog or a cat doesn't walk in the next, few minutes while we close out this presentation, right? People are distracted. They're at home. There's a lot going on. Don't assume you're going to get the same mind share as somebody who was spending 4 days away from their family in Vegas last year. You might only get a few minutes. So maybe it's just simply a coffee. Can you connect for 10 minutes and get a little break? book the whole hour, but give them the 50 minutes to relax afterwards, right? Block that time on their calendar, let them get some free space to actually do something. They'll appreciate you a whole lot more afterwards if you're not milking the entire time with them. So what are some of the ways you can do this? Again, like, let's make 2021 a year of fun, right? Let's get back to normal and do human things that are enjoyable with other people that we really like. Some of the packages that we've been working with people on are like a whiskey masterclass, things with chefs, learn how to make hot sauce at home, learn how to make sushi at home, build a charcuterie board. Like, there's lots of things you can do that people would like that I think people have been doing online alone, or in the case of whiskey, maybe on their couch alone at night, right? But gather with some other people, have a real conversation, learn a new skill. And again, if you notice, there's no product and features here, right? You can build some of those elements in, but really what we're talking about is building loyalty, building friendships, getting to know people in a way that's not just about, pounding your news into them. Make a real human connection. On the next slide, we'll just talk through sort of a run of show of what an event could be like this. Again, we understand everybody's here to reach business objectives, to make money for your company. It's not that it can't promote your company. In this sample run of show, we talk about, say we're hosting a sushi making class together. We're on there with maybe 10 or 15 people. At the beginning, everybody gets a chance to introduce themselves, talk about who they are. So it's not just speakers, everybody's involved from the start. You can have some company programming in this, talk about who's sponsoring it, introduce the people. That's okay. I think people expect that, but it should really be not about you and about something else. So again, sort of the world of influence works when the influencer's brand is enhanced by working with the corporate brand, right? Think about those. If somebody's attending one of your events, give them something of value, a chef-led experience with a top tier influencer, somebody they wouldn't normally get to meet. This is a huge opportunity in COVID. Influencers like travel and chefs, they need new things to do, right? They are home virtually. These are very charismatic people that love interactions. You can up level the experience for a lot of your people because these influencers are available to you. So think outside the box, get some top tier talent, really wow people in these small group environments, allow them to interact so they can, again, get to meet each other. Maybe it's core clients, maybe it's just an event about prospects. At the end of the year, don't forget about your employee base. A lot of companies, you aren't physically present. You aren't going to be doing holiday parties. Maybe there's things you can do with your teams and others, again, to create these moments, to really endear yourself and remind people, we know it was a tough year this year. We're on to bigger and better next year. And so we all want to sort of rally together. So don't forget to create these little moments because they'll help carry your news as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Todd. And I think we're learning that influencers are certainly that they're just faced with such a lack of content right now and opportunities for experiences. So they would just be so excited to even participate in these types of things. So you guys, we're going to turn this over to the Q&A portion. I'll remind you, please, if you have questions, to submit them either through the Q&A or the chat, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And we have one from Cameron. Cameron said, with CES being virtual, do you think this levels the playing field for brands with smaller marketing budgets who previously couldn't afford to be in the main exhibit hall, helping them steal attention away from the bigger names? Jordan, I'd like to get your perspective on that, having been at the show for 10 times plus. So let's start there, please, if you don't mind.
I mean, I think yes and no. I think it's going to be harder for smaller brands to break through because what you don't have is the smart, scrappy people on the show floor who can run around, know who they're looking for, and kind of drag them over to your specific experience, or do a walk and talk with them. You know that they're busy, you know that they're going from one meeting to the next, and you can just say to them, hey, I've got my thing with me, whatever your widget may be. Let me just talk to you while you're walking to your next thing. Or like, oh, hey, you have to head from the convention center to one of the hotels for private meeting rooms. Great, let me just hop in the cab with you. I'll talk you through it while we're on the way. I got your cab ride over. There's some scrappy things that you can do on the show floor because you're physically in proximity to people. You also are then physically in proximity to 200,000 people and very crowded booths and all of the craziness that happens at the show. So I think if you're a smart brand who can get out in front of people early with something that's truly innovative and interesting, there is an opportunity to break through in a different way. I also think there's a moment in time here where you can think about the fact of like, is CES really the place for you to launch your product? Or if you are one of those smaller brands, do you look at just a different moment in time? Do you time shift a week earlier, a week later, to some other point in the year that you have a different type of hook, depending on what you're trying to launch? That makes more sense for that to be your moment, and you're not worried about breaking through the crowd and the clutter of everything else that's going at CES. Yes, you may lose out on inclusion in some trend stories. That's certainly something to factor in. But it really is a moment in time to look and reevaluate your strategy versus saying, well, we need to be at CES because it's CES.
And I think from the production side, I think Jordan's spot on. I mean, there are some equalizers, right? Like if you're going up against a brand that spent whatever, $10 million, $20 million every single year, they have their stage, they have their 70-person crew, like they have this turnkey, all of a sudden that's all out, right? So yeah, maybe they have some advantages. We're all now operating under this new setup. And in the case of a lot of what CS is doing, sort of the platform that's going to be created around it. So it's almost like everyone has this assignment they have to tackle with parameters. And it's where creativity and presentation and unique things will be a little bit leveled. So again, I think gaining the attention of folks is probably a similar challenge, if not a little harder than it's been before. But sort of once you have that attention, you have the opportunity to wow in ways you probably couldn't if you were physically limited by the size of your booth or the lack of ability to get on the stage or whatever it is. So I think there are some opportunities for creativity to shine through. But again, the strategy of how you get that attention still really, it's going to require smart thinking.
There's also you could take some advantage of what normally is kind of downtime in Vegas, where you're like standing in line waiting to get into a big brand's press conference, or you're waiting in a cab line for, I don't know, sometimes 2 hours. Those downtime moments that suck up time and bandwidth physically at the show won't exist this year. So you can actually do more quick 15-minute check-ins that may work to smaller brands' advantage. Sorry, Todd, I cut you off there.
No, that's quite all right. I was thinking, in perspective of other shows we've seen this year too, and what it is. I think, there's a lot of questions of what CES will be in January, right? I think they're working on it. Nobody quite knows the impact it will have. What we've seen from other shows that have pivoted earlier in the process is maybe what the experience they designed wasn't great for the audience. So like a brand signs up for a specific benefit that may not translate. Like maybe that general session doesn't get as many people because it's not sensitive to the time. Again, a Pacific Coast event for an East Coast person who's at home with their family may not work, right? So we've seen timing, technology, all of these other things play in. So there's constraints that are different for every event that you just don't know. So even if you pivoted already for one show, the implementation at CES could be entirely different. So the leveled playing field, yes, but sometimes in a way that you don't know how to take advantage of, and you just need to be ready to look one more time, throw all your plans out the window and shift again to take advantage of whatever opportunity is there from the show promoters.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. Owen, from your perspective, I know you are attending lots of different digital events to learn from and see what other folks are doing in the space. Can you share some of the things that you've seen from other either tech shows or otherwise that you thought from a production standpoint or from an audience engagement standpoint worked really well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people underrate the ease of use for the audience. Again, we've consistently seen that, like, even something like forcing a journalist or attendee to download new software. Maybe they're not Teams people. You know what I mean? I don't know who that could be these days, but right, like, or they're not WebEx. Like, trying to force them into a platform can have challenges. So make sure that's notified of them in advance so they have time to download it. I think, again, sometimes accessing, all these social networks, the main network, have really downloaded great sort of live functions. So broadcasting your event on a YouTube or an Instagram or a Vimeo Live, which is a little more custom and private, I think traditionally brands have been adverse to that because it feels very consumer facing, but those are built to be really accessible and easy for everyone. So I think that's really some of the stuff we've seen. And then, when it comes to sort of this idea, I think of the virtual booth engagement, I feel like most of the feedback and the experiences we've had is it just is a little clunky. Like the time spent making it look like you're in like the digital audience that you've created kind of has a wow factor and looks super great in like that still frame that was set in advance of what this is going to look like. But when you're in there, it's sort of more confusing than it is helpful. So I really appreciate the events that really, I like to think of it, again, the ones that feel like a broadcast. I mean, you're really looking at it and the content is engaging, it's different. I have an opportunity to participate a little bit, but I'm also not sort of lost in this digital morass trying to work my way through. So I think it really goes back to I think that most people, and especially if you talk about people like journalists versus true consumers, they just don't want to be confused, right? Like they don't want to have a hard time with this. So I think really having a platform that's clean, easy to use, simple, and then putting that other energy into making the content you produce and the broadcast itself feel really high end is where the energy is best spent versus spending a lot of time literally making the 3D booth experience that you can pivot through. I think that's really where we've seen early the returns, and maybe it'll get there in 6 months to where that all feels seamless and we're used to it. But I don't think we're there yet. And so we've seen some real missteps, but also, good examples where the content shown through.
I think that's fair. I appreciate that. So whether you are in-house and you're on the client side or the brand side, or you're on the agency side, how do you level set expectations with senior execs that are used to seeing a report come out from CES and they expect a certain number of impressions or media hits or prospects or whatever it may be? What are the conversations that brands should be having internally right now to level set expectations as we enter into CES?
There's lots of ways to benchmark at this point in time. The good thing is CES is not mobile world. I think back in March when it was mobile world, mobile world decided not to happen and there was a bunch of brands that went virtual. Everybody was testing it. Nobody knew exactly what the turnout was going to be, all of that. And we certainly don't know right now what CES is going to look like, but we can look at all of the events that have happened throughout the course of this year and compare them to their previous year corollaries and show this event drove some more attendance, this event drove some less attendance, this event drove more media coverage. Is there a reason why it drove more media coverage? Was the product that was announced different, more innovative, presented in a different way that was actually more interesting than what happened the previous year, or vice versa? So there's some things that we can use to indicate how things could trend this year. I would say that, like, if you're used to X number of leads or X number of media impressions or kind of whatever the number is, and you're planning to approach the show the same way, you will likely be disappointed. But if you take into consideration some of the conversation here today and get some of kind of your smartest people around a table or a Zoom or a Teams or whatever makes the most sense in your environment, and start to talk through, well, this is what we ideally drive at this show every year. How do we get there? You can probably layer up some tactics to do it.
And I think it's gonna be interesting to see what level of new transparency comes from digital, right? Like the plus side of digital is it's much easier to track for the most part. That one-off conversation your sales guy may have had, in the lobby where he gave a card and they followed up 6 weeks later. Again, there was a degree of sort of ambiguity at times about some of this stuff. So it'll be interesting again to see if X piece of content exactly drove this result versus when you played it on the stage floor in that big video, what kind of impact it had. Maybe somebody tweeted about it in the moment, but there was a little more of a dotted line between those things. So I think maybe the reporting and metrics, while the volume may be smaller, may be clearer and more actionable. At least I think that would be the hope. We'll have to see.
Yeah, and I don't want to be the one to say it out loud, but like CES isn't going to be the last virtual event, right? This is the way for a while.
Todd, hush.
So, people are going to be, the hospitality industry is thinking conventions are 18 months out, right? So these big events that were signature for so many brands, as Jordan said, they're different, and we need to start planning for that and face reality of like, we can't let another quarter go by without driving business results. So we need to be focused to this new opportunity, whether you want to call it new reality or new normal, whatever it is, it's new, and we need to live in this environment and be successful in it. So I think you've seen plenty of brands start to shift. And I think the expectations for these events just keep going up and up over the year. Like, I think people, to Jordan's point, people had tolerance when we were making it up on the fly in March and April. You're 90 days out now, you've got plenty of time to plan. Like, why not make those investments and really impress people?
No, I think that's great. And final question, you guys, unless anyone else submits questions through the chat function. So let's fast forward. It's mid-January post CES, or third week of January post CES. I have these assets. I am disappointed. I have not gotten the eyeballs that I wanted, or maybe I'm getting beat up internally because my reports don't match the same, results that I had last year, or whatever it may be. What do I do? I've got some assets. Maybe I have some content. Maybe I haven't met all the media that I wanted to, or otherwise. I'd love to hear perspectives on, January with all these new brand assets that we have available. What can or should I be thinking about?
I mean, I can start from a paid perspective. I mean, if you figure that you have done this right and you have a hub for all of your content, right? There's maybe multiple hubs, one for media influencers. So you've got a place with all your assets where people can consume. You can see how those worked and which ones you need to amplify. Right, the paid should be a component, but it can certainly be something to help you close a gap. And again, those range broadly from trade industry publications to big consumer outlets. You can whitelist influencer content. There's a bunch of options you have from paid to help sustain that buzz. And a lot of times, we'll work with our PR colleagues at the agency to help create a little buzz that helps make earned easier, right? It's always an option too. To leverage paid to help make your earned and owned channels work even harder.
Yeah, I think interrelated. So no, I mean, just like the events are going away, the sales experience is not. It's unlikely your sales team is going to be out on the road again in February, right? So the killer product video and presentation you created now can also become part of a digital sales experience where, again, your prospects are connecting, or your salespeople are connecting with your prospects virtually. So again, it should have a long tail function sort of practically in that same way. And I think also, just to build on the thought leadership point, I mean, with the executives that we work with, thought leadership is not that one presentation you thought of and it goes out the window. That shouldn't be the way to look at it. I mean, you're building this reputation. You're sometimes building your talk track, and you're building your presentation and expanding and adding new stories and layers. So I think, again, if you put that energy in sort of launching it at CES, that should be the beginning of this sort of digital integrated thought leadership strategy that you're going to continue to roll out throughout the rest of the year. So that I really think of that as something, as a start, not an end. At least that's what I would tell my senior executive who wasn't thrilled with the results. We're just beginning, Bob. Like, we're just starting with you, right? We're growing from here on out.
I will also say CES, because of the nature of it, it creates a natural news hook. It doesn't create your only news hook. A lot of times there's product that are revealed at CES that don't go on sale for a month or two after, if that. They may come out mid-year. So I think it's important to consider CES as a moment, but not the only moment that you will have throughout the year to be creating a hook to talk about your product, your service, kind of whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, Jordan. The points that you've made about time shifts and thinking about when the right cadence for you is, and is it around the schedule of the show, or is it inside and around that? I think is really interesting for brands when they're thinking about their go forward strategies. Mm-hmm. All right. Any final comments from the panel before we, as Todd said, give people some of their hour back because they'll appreciate it? Is there any other thoughts that we have not considered or that you want to share before we end?
I will just say start early.
Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We appreciate all of your time. Hope this has been valuable for you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.